yourself in a position or place where you'd rather not be? Sometimes it is our own doing, our own poor choices that bring us to a place we would not choose. At other times, it is a series of circumstances that carry us to that place. A church near campus has a chapel for university students to meditate and pray. Students have the opportunity to reflect and share their thoughts in a notebook. The entries sometimes reveal an inner struggle. One young woman candidly shared, "My thoughts, ideas, beliefs, preconceptions, my ways and feelings of what is right or wrong are being challenged." We can probably all identify with her at some point in our lives. Other people sometimes challenge what we believe. We wrestle with how we can live in the world while maintaining our faith. The same young woman writes, "I do not want to live a secluded lifestyle from the rest of the world." And we can sense her pain when she writes, "I'm frustrated with some of the Christians I know whom I feel I have to hide some things from." She then pleads, "From the small details of my life to the big, show me truth in how you desire this life of mine to be lived." Then in despair she concludes, "All I see is fakeness in me, in him, in her, in all." She cries out, "I want to know what is real." Have you ever felt that way? Perhaps it was peer pressure that thrust this young woman into a place where she was uncomfortable and clearly did not want to be. Moses was in a position he did not want to be in. It was a position that Moses probably would not have chosen for himself. God had called Moses to lead the people out of Egypt to the promised land. The journey into the wilderness had not been without incident. The Israelites dramatically escaped from the powerful pursuing Egyptian army through the Red Sea. Soon after that, the people began complaining and wondering why they were in the wilderness in the first place, with some expressing a desire to return to familiar surroundings in Egypt. They grumbled about food being scarce. God heard their cries and provided manna, bread from heaven, each morning. Later, quail was added to their menu. They griped about the lack of water, and again God responded, instructing Moses to strike his staff on a rock. The result was plenty of water, enough for all the people along with their livestock. You might have thought that the people would have trusted God, knowing that God was present and would continue to provide for them, but they did not. While Moses was on the mountain communing with God, the people down below made a golden calf and began worshiping it. This was a serious sin that broke several of the Ten Commandments. God was angry, threatening certain destruction and desiring to start all over with Moses. However, Moses interceded, pleading on behalf of the people. The result of that conversation was that the people would live. Moses would continue to lead the people to the promised land. When Moses descended from the mountain and saw with his own eyes what the people had done, he too burned with anger. How could the people have done such a thing, especially after all that God had done for them? There would be consequences from their sinful rebellion. Moses in a place he really did not want to be, out in the middle of nowhere with God threatening to abandon them. It has been said that when we are at our lowest point in our lives, we are the closest to God. At such times, we turn to God knowing deep within our hearts that God is with us and will somehow see us through our trials. Our descent to the depths does not usually occur all at once, but gradually. One misstep is followed by another, and before we know it, we're in a place we did not intend to be. It frequently takes much more effort to climb out of that place and rebuild our lives than to fall into such a place. But God remains with us and will never desert us, as the ancient Israelites would discover. The present situation would build Moses' character. In spite of their complaining, the people looked to Moses as their spiritual leader. Moses spoke directly with God, telling God what he thought at a considerable risk to his own safety. Again, he had the best interests of the people under his charge in mind. Moses would gain confidence from his experience and would be an effective leader. When God informed Moses that an angel would lead the people from that moment until they arrived at the promised land, Moses took exception. He knew that God was still angry with the people and wanted God to continue to take an active part in their sojourn. Moses would not stand for the notion that God would be absent, but insisted that the Lord God resume God's role. Where in the previous chapter, God referred to the people as Moses' people, in our lessons, Moses subtly reminds God that the people were in fact God's own people. Now, if I have found favor in your sight, Moses told God, show me your ways, so that I may know you and find favor in your sight. Moses was seeking a sense of assurance that he and the people would not be abandoned in the middle of the desert while sand was the only thing that anyone could see for miles and miles in every direction. It was at that moment that Moses realized that he could not continue without the daily presence of God. Left to his own devices, many things could go wrong. The people could very easily rebel against him, thus ruining God's plan. Moses shuddered to think what their sojourn would be like if God were absent. Deep within himself, Moses realized how much he needed God. This was another important turning point in his life. Moses drew on his personal relationship with God when he asked, "For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people, unless you go with us?" The people Moses was leading were not just ordinary people, but were God's own people. Moses continued his persuasive argument. "In this way we shall be distinct, I and your people, from every people on the face of the earth." What made these people distinct was that they were God's own and that God was with them, truly dwelling in their midst. God's constant presence protected the people in the face of danger and allowed Moses as well as the people to continue on their journey. God knew Moses, and Moses had found favor with God. Moses realized how much he needed God, and it seemed at that moment that God recognized the need for Moses. It was a moment of divine grace when God replied, "I will do the very thing that you have asked, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." God would be present once again with the people as they continued their journey to the promised land. One might have thought that this victory would be enough for Moses, but it was not. He appealed to God's gracious side, and God responded favorably. Moses made one more request of God: "Show me your glory." What more does Moses want? You could argue that God had already shown Moses glory. What else did anyone need? Perhaps Moses wanted to make sure that the breach opened up by the idolatry of the golden calf was now completely healed, so that it would not negatively affect the people any longer. Moses had committed his life to God and would continue with the people, knowing that it would not always be easy. He needed another sign and assurance that God was truly with him and all the people. Moses did not make his request lightly when he requested, "Show me your glory." If God would once again allow Moses to see God's glory, then Moses would know that everything would be all right. "I will make all my goodness pass before you," God told Moses, "and will proclaim before you the name, the Lord." However, this time Moses asked for more than was possible. "Given the gravity of Israel's sin," God explained, "you cannot see my face, for no one shall see me and live." In spite of the hurt and anger that the betrayal stirred in the heart of God, God did not seek the death of the people, but rather that they would continue forward. "I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy," God told Moses. While God remains loyal to past promises, God is always free to be whoever God needs to be in any situation. Then God directs Moses to a cleft in the rocks where he could safely observe the glory of God. Moses would see the glory of God pass, and for a brief second, see the back of God. Moses would experience the glory of God both by sight and sound. With this sign revealed, Moses would be able to go back down the mountain to lead the people. Moses would again descend the mountain after spending 40 days and 40 nights with freshly engraved commandments for all the people. Eleanor Jositis was sitting at home watching television one evening in 1962 when she was thrust into a place she did not want to be. She was watching a program about the Nuremberg trials that caused her to ask herself what she would have done if such atrocities were taking place in her own backyard. "I sat there and cried my eyes out," she remembered of the program that night. The program was interrupted with a breaking news bulletin. There were pictures of Mississippi police turning dogs and fire hoses on civil rights protesters. Eleanor knew that this was her moment of truth. She began supporting the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as riots burned parts of her hometown of Detroit in 1967. She quickly learned that hunger was merely a symptom of a much larger problem. You end racism, she claimed, by making sure people enter the economic mainstream and ensuring that they can support their own families. Makes sense. Focus Hope was founded the following year as a food program serving pregnant women and their new mothers. and their children. The food distribution program would eventually expand to include the elderly. Hunger is still a reality, Eleanor said. Do not pretend we have solved the problem of hunger, because we have not. Eleanor, the housewife who got off the couch, built an organization from a basement operation run by a handful of friends into a sprawling 40-acre campus in downtown Detroit. Today, Focus Hope employs over 500 people, boasts of more than 50,000 volunteers, and has helped over 4,000 people become gainfully employed through job training programs and teaching skills for the 21st century. You will not change a thing, Eleanor claims, by sitting in front of the television with a clicker in your hand. This incident from Exodus reminds us to trust in God at all times, especially when everything around us seems to be crumbling before our very eyes. At those times, when we sink into the depths of despair and we are not sure of anything, trust in God when we find ourselves in places we do not wish to be. And do not be afraid to step out in faith at times going against the popular current. It is at such times that we trust in the God who loves us, the God who is with us and will continue to be with us. While Moses might not have seen as much of God as he would have liked, he did see God's glory. Martin Luther, commenting on this passage, claims that we did see God when Jesus Christ died upon the cross.
Amen.
Amen.